Welcome, everybody. My name is Zach Smith. I'm a training and product specialist now with growers, live in Canada. Welcome back to our conference call. We've had a break for the last 4 months, but it's good to be back. Tonight, we are going to have Jim Hallbeisen on, our Director of Research, at first to go over a few things that he has in mind that are quite interesting. After that, Mike Bulcher, who is one of our district managers from Ohio, will be coming on. We'll be discussing some stuff he's done in his own operation this year and linking that with some research that Matt Gooding has done. There might be some other topics that pop up too. If you have a question or a comment, we'll have a time for that. You can, if you're on a computer or a phone, there's a little mic button that says mute. You should be automatically muted, most of you. Hit that to unmute yourself. If you're on a phone with a keypad, it's *6, and that'll unmute you. I think that's all for laying down the foundations. So, Jim Hallbeisen, if you're ready to go, you can take her away. I will work on finding Mike.
So, Zach, do you hear me all right?
I can hear you just fine. Yep.
Okay, very good. Thanks, Zach. Just to talk a little bit about the history of the conference call, I was looking back in the records, and we started doing the conference calls back in the fall of 2008, or actually the winter of 2009, when we had the extreme fertilizer prices the first time around. And the idea behind that was we had talked about it, and it was kind of a twofold approach. We thought that was a direct way to get to the customers if they had questions. Also, the sales force, they were able to interact with us. And that kind of set the stage for trying to let them know what was happening with the price of fertilizer. And then we also it was an opportunity to talk about the program itself, how to implement the program. Initially, we started off offering it twice a month. There was the evening call, and then we had a call during the day at about 1:00 Eastern time. And so it just evolved from there. We went to one call a month, and then that initially was an 8:00 Eastern. That gave the guys in the central time zone some problems, so we moved it back to 9, and then the summer we went to 10. And then eventually we went to eliminating the summer calls as the number of people that were able to participate dropped quite significantly. But so that means we've been doing the call, approximately from 8 to 22. We're working on 14 years now. And one of the things that's kind of evolved out of the call that has always been part of the organization, is the networking that we do within the organization. And that's a very, very critical factor, in my opinion. I've discussed this with, many customers, and people very much appreciate the networking that's done. Primarily, one part of the network that's very, very important is guys in their marketing, because again, the access to information is coming from the U.S. government, the WASAID report. And a lot of guys feel that report is biased according to, how the government wants the prices to work. And so they feel that gives them a very distinct outlook from guys that are, like themselves, are farmers. And that's one thing that I will discuss here a little bit before I turn this over to Zach again to get Mike going. But right now, the number one question is, what are these fertilizer prices going to do? So we're basically, transformed back to where we were in, 08 and 09. It's a little bit different situation now, in my opinion. In 08, 09, fertilizer itself was really the one ingredient in agriculture, or particularly in farming, that had skyrocketed at that time. And today, everything has gone up quite significantly. Cost of labor, fuel, equipment. I mean, everything is high priced at this point. So you're not just looking at one avenue being a major problem. So the discussion about prices is basically going to be tied to commodity prices. And see, that's something that's been changing here recently, not to the same degree as it did in 08 and 09 when prices backed off. They've pretty well held in there now, and that's kind of a weather-related factor. And so the information that's coming from the government, the U.S. government, particularly with the WASAID report, is going to affect basically fertilizer prices, because that's going to kind of determine where we're at with commodity prices. This week, the Farm Progress Show, which occurs in the state of Iowa this year, it rotates between Iowa and Illinois. That organization basically controls the publications that were distributed statewide: the Ohio Farmer, Pennsylvania Farmer, Illinois Farmer. Some of those publications have merged, some of those publications have disappeared, but the Farm Progress organization itself is still in existence and still runs those particular, the major farm show that occurs the end of August. Used to rotate between Illinois, Indiana, and Iowa. It eliminated Indiana several years back, and now it just rotates between Illinois and Iowa. But the Farm Progress, through their printed publications, they also do various other types of publications, and one is a podcast that they hold every Friday during the year, and they look at different subjects at these podcasts. And the most recent podcast, which have been a week ago tomorrow, the title of that podcast was "What's Driving Higher Fertilizer Prices?" And guys have been able to get on various websites, and if you have a podcast organizer that you work with, if you type that in for Farm Progress, that podcast will come up. And what they did was interview an individual that has worked for the various chemical companies for the last 35 years. And he went through a summary of where he feels this fertilizer pricing is going to go. And I found it absolutely very fascinating. Problem with this gentleman is, again, that he's biased to the industry and feels that they're doing the best they can, and he slants it in that way. I tend to disagree with that, but his facts tend to be very, very relevant. And he went through the individual elements, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. And the bottom line is that he doesn't feel that we'll see any price relief going into the 23 season. He looked at it from the idea of demand and supply. And his big demand narrative centered around the price of crops. He said as long as corn stays in that $6 range, soybean stay in the $14 range, that he felt that the price of fertilizer would pretty well stay the same. Now, when he looks at the supply side, it's very, very interesting. And I think you guys would find it interesting what he's talking about. The nitrogen issue is strictly tied to natural gas. And some of the largest supplies of nitrogen fertilizer are coming out of Europe, and they're tied to the natural gas coming out of Russia, which has basically been shut off at this point in time. And the discussion is that the Europeans are quite concerned about having enough gas to heat their homes this coming winter without the Russian supply. Well, in the past, even in the U.S., when natural gas gets to be in high demand for home heating, the people that make anhydrous basically stop making anhydrous and start selling heating fuel because the price is so much higher. And he's saying right now in Europe, the price of natural gas warrants about $1,500 a ton for anhydrous. Dave Armstrong is telling me there are some anhydrous sales occurring in Iowa for, $1,050, $1,100 a ton. But again, some of that is going to be, and probably the majority of is leftover material from last year. We've got contacts that working with 28 or 32% are telling us that the ports that they're pulling from their nitrogen, their volumes were left over were much higher than they have been in the past. And the scuttlebutt on that is that it's just the lack of demand. Guys cut back on the corn crop, or they cut back on the amount of nitrogen that they put on their corn crop. So you have a certain amount of leftover material that they're trying to, get rid of to open up their storage for next year's product. And they're pricing it as such to try to get it out of the warehouse. And what they're telling our contacts is that once that's removed, the price of nitrogen will definitely have to go up. Some guys are thinking that they're going to wait this thing out and see. They're saying right now, and this particular gentleman that did the podcast said, yeah, we see the prices coming down at the port. Well, the prices are coming down because there's no room for anything at the port. So they've got to remove some of that material. So if we get back to a normal usage or a certain amount of usage, the new product coming in is definitely going to go up. So nitrogen at this point, he just felt there was probably very little possibility of nitrogen dropping for the 23 season. Phosphorus, that's a China thing. He said 25 years ago, China was the largest importer of phosphorus in the world. And in the last 10 years, they've become the largest exporter of phosphorus in the world. And what they've basically done have said they're getting concerned about the usage of phosphorus out of their mines in China. So they have basically cut their exports off to try to maintain that amount of phosphorus that's in the phosphorus mines. He said in 20, they exported about 20 million metric tons of phosphorus. And it looks like for the 22 season, they will export about 10.5 million metric tons. So it's basically cut in half. And that's really ran the price of phosphorus up. He said the only bright spot we see with phosphorus is the price of sulfur has dropped quite significantly. It's kind of interesting. In the podcast, he said one of the areas where the demand for sulfur has dropped significantly is in the sulfuric acid market, because sulfuric acid is used to wash off steel for computer components. And he said, the problems they're having with computer components and availability has cut the demand for sulfur quite significantly. So that is that price has kind of dropped. And we've heard in the past that sulfur is very key to making phosphoric acid. So he said that may hold some possibilities for phosphorus in the future. And then potash, he said that's basically you've got Canada, Russia, and Belarus, which is a former Soviet Republic country. Belarus is landlocked, and the only way they can ship it through the port or through seaports is through Lithuania, and Lithuania's pretty well shut them off because of their disputes on their borders. So they have to rail their potash out of Belarus, and he said that the speed of that will be down quite significantly. Now, the Canadians are talking about increasing the amount of released potassium into the world market, but he said to fill that gap is going to be very, very difficult to get that accomplished. So he said all three elements, it looks right now, are going to be in a shorter supply. And see, this is the thing that I keep talking to farmers about. You know, price is going to be an issue. Nobody likes it, but availability could also be a big issue too. So that's something that you're going to have to put in the mix when you start looking at what you're going to do about your fertilizer needs, in my opinion. So the other issue is the WASAID report that comes out on September 12th. That's Monday. The yields have been dropped. The government dropped it a little bit in August, but the farm tour that's conducted by Pro Farmer, and then the virtual farm tour, which is conducted by a computer concern, have dropped the yield significantly. The last government yield was like 178, and the Pro Farmer tour and the virtual tour dropped it to 168. Now, some of the other services are starting to come down into that range. And the big question is what will the U.S. government do on Monday with their new yield numbers? And again, we have contacts in the organization that are telling us there's some early harvesting going on in the state of Iowa that's basically designed by the ethanol industry to make sure they've got corn so that they can run year round. And these contacts are telling us that where these guys are expecting, 210, 220 for a yield, they're struggling to get to 140. So again, the total corn yield for the U.S. crop, there's discussion that this thing is going to be significantly lower than what everybody is talking about at this point. So again, I think that's something that guys can look at two ways. How are you going to market? And then number two is how is that going to affect fertilizer prices? The gentleman that conducted the podcast is basically saying that supply is driving the price or demand is driving the price of fertilizer. And to me, that's just the exact opposite, because as the supply is becoming less, the price is going up quite significantly. So I don't think demand is the total issue. He's trying to say that the fact that the chemical companies are trying to take advantage of this, that's all basically in the formula to make it look like they're taking advantage of the farmer. And the bottom line is the way the numbers look, that's exactly correct. So again, I think guys can realize where that's headed. And then the final thing that I wanted to talk a little bit about is that same podcast the week before they had the podcast about fertilizer prices. They were discussing a nutrient field day or nutrient seminar that was held by the largest phosphorus supplier in the world, Mosaic. And Mosaic is basically saying that, and they tried to paint the picture that this is a yield factor. To increase yields, the farmer is going to have to start looking at different approaches to applying fertilizer. They're as much as saying this idea that pounds are coming of production are coming from pounds of application. They're saying that has to change, because to really get to the higher yields, you're going to have to get the soil alive. And see, I think their idea is we've got to keep selling a certain number of pounds to keep our profitability where it is. And we're going to try to convince the farmer that he's going to add on to the yield by improving the biological activity in the soil. And see, at growers, we've tried to paint that as a different picture. In other words, you get that biological activity going, you can maintain yield and do it with significantly less input. And see, that's where we're varying with the industry at that point. They want the volume to still be applied, and we're saying it's not necessary because 96% of what you're raising is sunlight, air, and water. So again, you figure out how to get those nutrients available. And by the way, the gentleman that held the podcast, they asked him how farmers are going to deal with this high price fertilizer. And he just as much as said, well, we'll do soil tests. And if your P and K is up there, you probably don't need as much fertilizer. It talks about strategizing the application of your nitrogen. And he talked a little bit about fall application of nitrogen, which we all know is you're losing an awful lot of it. He's right to spread it out during the season, but the loss from that fall application is quite significant. So again, they know that there's a problem, and they think the solution to the problem is we've got to work on the volume that we're applying. And see, the idea from growers is when you get that biological activity going, guys, the amount you need to get the job done, they're right. You got to strategize it. It's the 4 R's. You got to get it at the right place at the right time. And see, then the amount you need will start to drop significantly. And if the biologicals helping you trap that material and refeeding it to the plant, your efficiency goes up quite significantly. So they're struggling with trying to introduce the actual solution to the problem, because it's basically going to whittle away on their profitability, which is geared to selling volume. Okay, Zach, that pretty well gives these guys the opening salvo, and I'm sure we'll have a little more discussion about fertilizer prices before we go to the field in 23.
Great. Thank you, Jim. All right, we'll get moving on into our next section. Mike Bulcher, where'd you go?
Can you hear me?
Yep, there you are. Welcome, Mike. So Mike's a district manager with us. His dad was a district manager with the company for a very long time, and that's passed on to Mike. Mike, if you want to, I figured we can start with you talking about the drilling experiment you did this past season, and if there's anything else you did new in the fields.
Well, I was going to start out by saying I priced 28% yesterday, and it's $500 a ton, and it wasn't that high until December of last year around here. And I believe it was down to about 540 or about 450. Excuse me, get my numbers reversed. But so I don't know, I thought I heard him say that it's went down, but around here it's kind of going up. And one of the things I've noticed in this area is there's a lot more farmers with a lot more tanks that you can see visibly driving down the road, starting to see that tank manufacturers are doing pretty good because everybody's stocking up on tanks and trying to strategize their buying, I guess. Buying it cheap if they can, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I thought maybe I lost you there a second.
No, I'm here. Have you had any customers doing that for you, Mike?
No, yeah, I was at a guy's place here a week and a half ago, and he bought nitrogen and had actually bought it last year and decided not to plant as much corn, so he still had some nitrogen in there. And I got him a little worked up accidentally, not really on purpose, but he was bragging about having it, and I said, man, I hope you got that stuff insured. It was sitting there kind of, off the side of the barn. Well, that's the first thing I think of when you got a plastic tank full of fertilizer and what that stuff costs now. First thing I think of is, man, if that's got a city here, I think I'd get insurance on it.
You gonna drive back later, Mike, with a little pump?
No, I'm just saying.
Yeah.
Hey, we had one time we had a guy with some tanks out. The cows got out and ended up knocking one of the valves off the tank. And I mean, there's a lot of things can happen when you got that kind of money sitting in a tank, sitting in the drive. I'm probably making everybody nervous out there. It's got some now. I didn't mean to do that, but
Something like that's happened
anyway,
with one of our salesmen up here too. Valve gets knocked a little bit, and then the yard is soaking wet when there hasn't been a drop of rain.
if you're a salesman anymore with fertilizer, ain't too many people want to talk to you. They all assume it's high priced, and that's not really necessarily true. I mean, depending on how you use it. But
Yeah.
you said something about a drilling project or something. What was you explain
No,
what you meant by that?
When we talked today, correct me if I'm wrong here, but you'd said that you had done something with your seed drill this past season.
Well, yeah, no, actually here, I guess it's been about 5 years ago. I put a application system on my 750 drill. Always had one on the planter for corn. And then what we did, we had that set up to go 4 gallon on the seed on the corn. And then for soybeans, we would just put 2 gallon of water in there and do that. And I bought a drill and I really like doing the 15-inch rows with my soybeans because whenever we're harvesting, I go right in behind the combine and drill my wheat. So I thought, well, it'd be nice to be able to put that on with the wheat. And I know you was talking about that on this call. That's why I brought it up, that I got, I'm set up to go 4 gallon on the seed with the drill when I plant. And what we've been doing with that is cutting that with 2 gallon an acre. So I put 2 gallon on when I drill my wheat. And I just happened to look at that calendar here tonight. I seen that he had 4 gallons, and I'm thinking about upping that because usually what I generally do for wheat, and it's not too many people like talking about wheat with the way the market's been with it, but I usually put 2 gallon on and then ammonia sulfate and urea in the fall. And that's been working okay, other than I'm thinking of bumping that up maybe a gallon or 2, and just because not putting on as much urea, but putting on a little more growers when I drill in the fall on my wheat seed. And then in the spring, I come back with 2 gallons over the top, and then put 25 gallon of 28% on top dress in the spring. And then generally fungicide and 2 gallon on at that time with NA.
So right now you're looking at about 6 gallons total?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, 6 gallon, and then plus the NA at full rate, which is 8 ounces, or 1 gallon for 15 acres. And I've done that over the years here. The last I guess been doing that now about 4 years, and I've had 80 plus wheat yields here, all except for this year. We was this year I think I'd have done that again, but the field that I had the wheat in was a little bit on the wet side, and we had a wet cold spring, and anyway it did more like about 76, which still isn't bad.
No, that's nothing to shake a stick at.
A little bit. What's that?
I said that's nothing to shake a stick at.
Well, everybody you ask, of course, they answer after me. Some of them's up into the hundreds. So I really don't know if that's true or not. But anyway, they're all getting big yields.
Yeah.
Hey, Mike, I got a question.
Yeah.
Hey, sorry to interrupt, Mike, but that spring application of nitrogen, are you spraying that on, or are you streaming that on?
Yeah, streaming it. From what I know, 28%, you don't dare try to spray that on.
So how's your rig set up to stream, Mike?
Well, it's set up to go 25 gallon, and it's got the three hole streamers on it. I don't have the bars. I got I guess they're 5-hole, and I just stream it on that way. I don't run orifices. Some guys have to run orifices to get down there, but I don't run orifices.
And you don't have any problems mixing growers with the 28?
No, I don't mix them. I had a customer do that one time, and I wouldn't dare try that.
You just do 2 separate applications then?
That's right.
Okay.
Yes, I do. Yes, if there's any question of something not working with growers, I just do 2 applications. I mean, you just got to make another trip across there. But Liberty soybeans, I've been here the last few years. I've really enjoyed and liked using Liberty soybeans, and I have not sprayed growers in Liberty. I know some guys have, but I make that extra trip, and part of that's because I bought a bigger sprayer. But at any rate, what they claim, you got 2 modes of action. You got your Liberty, which is systemic, and of course the growers is kind of like your Roundup, which it gets down into the root. So I don't put them on together because, well, I don't know. I know you can do it. I know guys have done that. And then later I said, oh, you done that? I wouldn't have done that. Well, then why not? Well, I guess that's kind of an unknown. There's probably other people that's done it with no problem, but you got 2 different modes of action with 1 application. I'm not really sure, what you're doing there in a positive way. So if all else fails, you got to read the back of the can, and that's what I was always told back in school. And with the Roundup now, we used to always mix that with the growers, but I've kind of moved away from Roundup because of resistant weeds, and I've been using the Liberty program, which has been working really good for us. And the only thing is, I'm spraying that Liberty on at, like, say 10 to 1, 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. where the growers, I'm out there 5 or after. Usually it's around 7. So yeah, 2 different applications. And with the wheat nitrogen, you don't dare want to put, I'm sure there's grades. I was told that there's several different grades of nitrogen, and some of them you might be able to mix with the growers. But from what I understand, nitrate in your nitrogen and the growers, they don't get along, and they'll turn into a mud slurry. I had a customer that had that happen to him. And just from hearing the fear in his voice talking about it and what he was going to have to do, I've been very cautious never to mix the 2.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So anyway, with the drilling, they've got kits now that you can buy and put on these drills. And like that picture in the calendar you guys were talking about, he's got a Kinsey planter that's set up on, he told me, is how they're doing that on 15-inch rows. And I'm not set up that way, but anyway, he's set up to plant corn or beans with that, and then he's planting his wheat also.
The picture that Mike's talking about, everyone, is the September photo in our 2022 calendar. It's a field of Bruce Stevens where you can see the info that the rows that are, I'll say parallel to the camera are planted with 4 gallons to the acre, and then there's diagonal rows that were planted with nothing, and there's a pretty significant difference. We're hoping to have Bruce on a future call to talk about that. He's come on the call before. He's great to have on. And it links up very nicely with some of the research that we've done, but he unfortunately couldn't be on tonight, and we'll see about future calls. He has an odd work schedule. So anyway, that's what Mike was referring to. I think, Jim, can you speak at all to the different modes of action? What effect that might have?
Yeah. Well, I'd like to comment first on the picture. When Bruce sent me the picture, he said the rows that are straight in front of the camera, he that's the way he planted the wheat. Well, he had some wheat left over in the boxes, and rather than screw around, dumping it out, he said, I just went in and planted on the angle. Well, he said, I had run out of growers, the day before when I got done planting. And he said, the next morning, I just ran out there and did those angling rows. And if you kind of look to the left, you can kind of see where he started running out. And that just shows you the activity of the growers. And see, I think with wheat, that's kind of a key factor, because again, that crop's going to go through a dormancy period, and see the effect of the growers on the plant. It's very significant getting it started. And see, it's always been the discussion that when you put it on the seed in a wet, cold environment, that's when it works the best. But this was planted, in the fall when you had a fairly warm soil, and you can still see the difference. And see, that goes into discussing, the NPK for sure, but also talking about the micronutrients and what they can do to get that young plant going. You get the foundation going. It's kind of like that, the young calf, and trying to, several of the articles I've said a run hog is always a run hog. So you want to try to get that plant going out of the chute. To get back to what Zach was talking about, the modes of action, and Mike we've had guys that have used growers, with Liberty. We've actually had some guys, years ago, we had growers with 2,4-D. And guys were cutting the rate of 2,4-D quite significant. Well, the 2,4-D we have today, there's been some guys that have mixed growers with it, but we just don't have a lot of experience with that. So you're basically on your own. That's a different formulation of 2,4-D than the original one. It's got to be adjusted to match up with the modification of the plant itself. Now, when you start talking Liberty, it's basically the same thing. Now, Roundup, that is basically the same thing also, but the difference between Roundup and Liberty and 2,4-D is the species of plants you're going after. With Roundup, you did get a little activity on your broadleafs, but it was very weak. Your main activity, was on the grass. So again, the corn plant can withstand that much better. Now, when you get into soybeans, you didn't seem to have any problems there either, because again, it seemed like the glyphosate in the Roundup was reacting the same way as the tech grade phosphates in the growers. Now, when you get to Liberty or 2,4-D, you've got a whole different mode of action there. So again, if you're deciding that you're going to try to put growers in the Liberty or in the 2,4-D, you're on your own. You're even on your own in Roundup, but there's been so much of that done that it's a fairly safe factor. But if you had a problem with your kill and Monsanto found out that you put a fertilizer product in there, they wouldn't give you any assistance with it. So again, they're completely, protecting their backside there also. So anytime that you mix, that I think Mike's approach is correct. You go two different trips. That way you don't have any of that chemical interaction. And then the discussion about the growers with the 28%. We've got guys that are spraying 28 with growers and getting away with it. And see, like Mike said, the type of 28 you've got, the water that you use is critical. It's got to be low TDS. And again, we understand that's happening, but for guys that are rookies at that can get to be a serious issue. You go back to the early 90s, and we had guys that were trying that, and some cases it worked fine. In some cases they had a real problem. And see, I think if we knew anything about dissolved solids in water back in the 90s, that would have answered some of those questions for us. So again, if you want to mix growers with 28%, you got to know what you're doing. And see that you've got to investigate with guys that are doing that and having success with it. Now, the mixing of urea for the nitrogen factor in growers. That's been going on from day one. Again, it's not as easy because the urea is not a liquid product to begin with, but the ability to mix it with the growers. And we've got some guys in the South using liquid ammonium sulfate that are mixing it with growers and having success because the nitrate reacts with the micronutrients that's in growers. So again, if you put an ammonia form of nitrogen in there, that's the same as what's in growers. All nitrogen in growers is ammonia form, and that is a cation like the micronutrients, so you don't get that chemical interaction. You throw that anion nitrate in there, and now you start to get combinations that aren't very soluble, and that's where the precipitation comes from for you. Anything else on that, Zach?
No, that's great. That's perfect. Thank you, Jim. All right, what time are we at?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Mike.
Oh, I was just going to say, I talked to a lot of farmers out here that don't want nothing to do with spraying, and you know, some of the things Jim just brought up, along with seeing mistakes made by others, even professional applicators. You know, it does kind of scare people. And anytime I guess you're not sure, you're always better off just to read the label. You know, that's what they teach in application school. So we had a fella here a year ago. They sprayed a field, I believe it was enlist beans. Well, actually what happened, the guy had called an applicator to spray it, and he asked him what he had on there, and he grabbed a bag of what he put on there without thinking about it. He'd only planted about 3 acres of 120 with these enlist beans. The rest of them was something else. And that guy went in there and sprayed it. And I tell you, everybody in the whole countryside around here knew about it because they was all asking and talking about it. So I guess you got to be careful when it comes to spraying what you're doing. And the best thing you can do is always be sure what you're doing. And part of that's even calling the guy you bought the product off of to find out. I think people are afraid to do that sometimes, but it's worth it.
Yeah. Mike, is there anything else you want to cover?
Well, I don't know. It depends how much time you got. If you got somebody else waiting, go ahead and put them on. I'm sure people want to hear, maybe they want to hear something else anyway.
No, there's nobody else that we have planned to come on.
Oh, well, you said about Chris. I didn't know if that was going to work
that
out.
didn't work out. I'll give a little brief on that though. So we've hired a new employee at the office, Chris Coles, as a sales manager position, and we're hoping to have him on hopefully next month in October to introduce himself and talk a little bit. It didn't work out for tonight, but hopefully that'll be next month. So tune in for that. Usually in October, we have kind of a pricing office news, company news call in place of our usual call. And I'll have a lot of the office staff on it. A president, Matt Schroeder will come on often. Since in the past, our pricing structure has been set, like we'll give a price in October and that'll be set for the entire year. That call made a lot of sense. Given the volatility of pricing right now, I think we'll still bring that on because we are moving to a single price rather than the graduated bulk pricing that we have now. And so we'll be discussing that. But given the volatility of raw material markets, stuff like that, availability too, we won't be able to give a set price as we have in past years. So that said, that
go ahead and finish what you're going to say, and then I got something. If Jim's still listening, I want to ask him. It was asked me.
Sure. So that'll be next month. Hopefully we can get Bruce Stevens on as well. If not, we'll probably end up discussing some research stuff, and we'll see. That'll come out in the email. We'll get it out sooner than we have this time, I mean. And go ahead, Mike. Okay,
when you're spraying soybeans, generally what we recommend or say, and the experts do too, when you spray, you want to hit it when they first start flowering. And then generally within about 14 days later, I'll come back in with a second spray. I usually put 2 gallons on the seed and then hit it twice. And if anybody calls me and they're wanting to know when to spray, generally around them applications is when I recommend them to spray. Now, I've had some people that spray earlier, and then I had a guy ask me here just, 2 weeks ago. He said, how late can you spray that it's not too late? And I said, boy, that's a good question. I said, what's the beans doing? He said, well, I got pods all the way up them, but he said, I'm getting some flowers on the top. I said, well, if you want to go ahead and spray them, I said, it's like this. I guess it's a good experiment. Go, it's your growers. You make the call. But I said, I don't know as if it's ever a bad time, but he said, when is it too late to make a difference? Can Jim answer that?
Yeah, Mike, we're getting more guys, particularly old line growers guys, that are saying if there's any growth in the season left, in other words, I was talking with John Sensenik today or yesterday, and there was a gentleman that had called John, and he was concerned that his beans, the pods, weren't sizing up, and he was thinking about, it's time to make forage beans out of them. He just didn't think they would plump up and give him decent yield. And John kind of discouraged that, because John said, my experience is if you got moisture, those beans can come awful fast. And, that happened to our operation one time. We planted really late in the season. And boy, they were just as green as grass going into September. And we had put on a late August spray. And I'll tell you what, man, those beans, they came on and they weren't 80 bushel, but man, they were very good beans. I think if you've got moisture, sunlight is going to be a driving factor, which many times in late season, you tend to have decent sunlight. We got a cutoff low coming in here that's going to cut the sunlight off for a couple of days. But after that, we're supposed to go back to bright sunlight again. And it seems a lot of the growers guys are saying is they get that growers on there, the activity of the plant seems to improve too. And see, the key about that, in my opinion, is we're so focused on the chemistry of the soil that we forget about the biological activity. And see, this winter and in the future solutions, some of the work that Matt Gooding's doing, where he's foliar feeding these plants and then measuring, the biomass in the soil, we're seeing significant increases from the foliar feeding, which again is that makes total sense, because that phosphorus is going right to the root zone and dragging those elements with it. And see, the idea is that the plant uses some of that, but what it doesn't use, it transports to the root zone and then is available for the biological activity to work. See, that's why we feel the calcium is such a key factor, because it helps expand your root zone. And so if you've got a larger root zone and those roots are exuding those nutrients, the excess or the volume of biomass that you're affecting is significantly bigger. So, and what can the microbes do for the plant? That synergy between them. The plant's demanding something to increase size, to increase capture of sunlight in order to produce viable seeds. The microbes are going to do that. And so that's, I think that late foliar feed, and you made a good point, Mike, that he still had blooms coming on the top. We had a gentleman in Georgia that sprayed 3 times. He had indeterminates. He was going to try to hit each set, and he did. And he said, the pod set was fantastic. There's only one, chink in the armor. It never rained again, and it was dry land. And he ended up with all BBs. So that hurt his yield significantly. See, so I think the farmer, like you said, they've got to make the call on that. What their gut tells them about what they've got for moisture, what the potential is. Usually in September, where I live, we tend to get some rains, and those later pods, they can have a significant number of beans in there, or sizable beans. That terminal cluster, we've seen them with 15, 16 pods on there, and if they're even if they're just twos, and you can plump all those up, that's a fair number of beans in that top. And again, the fertilizer is high priced, but if you gain a couple bushel, you're more than paying for that. So I think all that is part of the gauge that the farmer has to use. And we've always stressed the first set, because usually that's your biggest. But keeping the plant actively growing, affecting the terminal cluster, those later sprays, could be helpful. And the weather is going to play into that. But again, a lot of guys are seeing that later spray. These beans got some good vitality to them. Particularly like in our operation, our spray on beans didn't go on at the timing that I liked. It went later. But I'll tell you what, man, once we got that baby on, we got a little bit of moisture, had decent sun, man, they took off like a rocket. See, and I still attribute a lot of that to the biological activity in the root zone, encouraging the plant or helping the plant, with the growth process. So, the late spray, it's not ideal, but in many cases, it looks like it's very helpful to the plant. And so I think your best recommendation is correct, Mike. The guy's just got to kind of decide what he wants to do. And, the volume is another issue. Should you go 2 or 3? If you're going to perk the yield 5 or 6 bushel, or 2 or 3, maybe one's enough. I think that's again in the producer's realm to decide where to go with that.
And
well, I'm going to tell.
I was going to say that's a loaded question, because we always spray these apple trees when the leaves are falling off in the fall for next year, so that does good. Yep. And then I told him, I said the salesman in me will tell you if it's not yellow, go ahead and spray it. Dad always said you don't learn nothing with that stuff sitting in the tank. So it might be an expensive education. At the same time, you might be really glad you did it.
Yep.
Well, my whole theory is I did it this morning. Yeah, they're late beans, late planted beans. I did 3 quarts. My theory is on that, there's no way that growers is wasted. It may not yield or increase that crop this late, but it's going to be there for the following ones. And I just think this whole thing's cumulative. And I think that 3 quarts on there on a live crop that is still translocating sugars and energy in the roots, and the way soybeans fix nitrogen and everything is going to help do that. And I just think it helps the next crop minimally. At minimum, it's helping the next crop. So that's how I look at it. So I don't ever see it as wasting. When you have something live and growing, it's a battery charging up your soil. So let's put a little juice on it and help that battery get bigger, store more juice. That's how I look at it.
Well, they used to always recommend spraying nitrogen on your crop after it was down on the refuge to help break it down over winter. Now, if you're going to waste nitrogen, why not try wasting a little bit of growers and see what happens?
Yeah.
The microbes are still breaking it down.
Well, and I had a customer, their brothers down in Kentucky, and they sprayed soybeans late. They just decided to put 2 gallon on, and they drove in the field and had their pattern and didn't go down next to the river and, this sort of thing. And they said they didn't see anything because they were watching the combine, but the wheat they planted afterwards showed exactly everywhere that they drove, and it was profound. So they're all convinced on that too now. It's like, hey, you hardly can go wrong. doesn't help the current crop, it's going to help the next one.
We've got older customers that have, used that philosophy for a fair period of time. They're in full agreement with Matt on that. So,
well, answer this one for me, since all you guys are on here and listening. You got these guys complaining about the prices, but then they ask me a question like that, and I get confused. I thought you said this stuff was expensive. Why are you asking me about spraying it late like this now?
That's exactly right, Mike.
Well, they put dry fertilizer on when there's no crop growing. They don't think nothing about that.
Well said. Well said.
That's all I've got.
All right. I'm going to close down the meeting. Thank you, everybody, for listening in. Sorry we didn't get to questions. Our next meeting is it'll be the 13th of October, again at 9 p.m. Eastern Time. And we hope you'll tune in. Thank you for listening. Thanks a lot, Mike and Jim.